Hey, what is up everyone, I am Demon Cringe. Now let me ask you a question. How many of you remember the movie The Mask starring Jim Carrey? Well everyone, a lot of people probably don't remember or don't know the fact that there was a cartoon that came out around the same time the movie did. This is The Mask, the animated series, and my god, this intro is really good.
Winning smile, I'm a living lesson in flair and style. You just can't help but stare at my savoir-faire. I'm Nouveau, Deco, Roman, Greco, Rococo, Baroque, Bebop, hip-hop, flip-flop. Somebody stop me! Pretty Viridian faces like mine don't come a dime a dozen. I stand out in the crowd. When they made me, yeah, they broke the mold. Wholesome and kind, estate and refined, totally out of my mind.
Yes everyone, this is Mask, the animated series, the cartoon that we all know and love about the mischievous superhero wielding the mask of Loki. Yes ladies and gentlemen, in fact, the mask that we all know today was actually inspired by the 1989 comic book called Mayhem, made by Dark Horse Comics that had a much more darker and adult-oriented setting. So the Mask cartoon was made in 1994 by Duane Capizzi and directed by Russell Calabrese. It ran for 3 seasons with a total of 54 episodes, and it also had a pretty short-lived comic book called Adventures of the Mask, written by John Accordi, who also wrote the original comic book. The show originally ran as a Saturday morning cartoon on CBS, but moved to Cartoon Network after its cancellation. So now with that short description out of the way, let us get on to it, okay? So the story is about Stanley Ipkiss, who, unlike in the movie where he decides to throw the mask of Loki into the river to get rid of it, decides to actually keep it and is forced into using it to fight crime and to stop the main villain Pretorius from taking over Edge City, while at the same time trying to keep his alternate persona a secret. Now on to the characters, and first we have our protagonist Stanley Ipkiss, who, like I said, unlike in the movies, decides to keep the mask of Loki instead of throwing it into the river. He's portrayed as a kind-hearted but also stereotypical pushover nice guy who has bad luck with women and also lives with his dog and works at Edge City Savings and Loans. The Mask, on the other hand, is Stanley's repressed wild man persona who is suave, outgoing, and energetic. Now, ironically enough, even though the Mask is more confident than Stanley, both of them apparently have bad luck with women. What's also really interesting about the Mask is that its power is entirely dependent on the repressed emotions of the wearer, as in one instance Stanley actually does try to be more confident, and in turn the mask's ability gets weaker. Next up we have Stanley's dog Milo, who is a Jack Russell Terrier and also has been wearing the mask on a few occasions, and he is also very smart since he can understand human language. Piggy Brandt is a reporter and Stanley's best friend who often gets into trouble because she wants to further her tabloid career and often ends up being saved by the mask, although she really isn't a damsel in distress as she is very resourceful at getting herself out of sticky situations. She has also worn the mask on a few occasions, and now the last 2 main characters I want to talk about are Lieutenant Mitch Calloway and his partner Doyle, and Calloway is pretty much the usual short-tempered old-school cop, and he also believes that Stanley is the Mask, but he just cannot prove it, while Doyle on the other hand is very lazy and cowardly. Now here's what's pretty interesting folks, so Lieutenant Calloway is actually one of the characters from the original comic book that was brought forth into the cartoon itself and all that, and in the original comic book Stanley ends up getting shot to death by the cops, while Calloway ends up using the power of the mask in order to kill mobsters and all that. So that's actually pretty interesting the way they handled him. Like in the original comic book he was like really violent, but in this one it's like really kid friendly. Also, another bit of trivia, in the original comic book the nickname for the mask was Big Head. And now on to the villains, and man oh man, there really are a lot of villains in this cartoon and all that, but I'm only going to talk about the most impactful ones. So first off, we obviously have the main bad guy Pretorius, a mad scientist who wants to take control of the mask and also take over Edge City in the process. He had his head removed so he could use a more powerful robotic body, and he is also one of the few villains who actually knows the mask's true identity, which actually kind of reminds me of the Joker and Batman in all honesty, you know, kind of like a comedic version of them. The funny thing is there was actually a comic book crossover between the Mask and the Joker trying to annoy the crap out of Batman. It's pretty funny. Now Pretorius in one episode actually did end up wearing the mask, and unlike the other users, kind of like Stanley and all that, he actually ended up retaining his original personality, which made him that much more powerful. Walter on the other hand is Pretorius' henchman who, just like in the original comic book, book, is pretty much the only character who can actually damage the mask. Once he was actually capable of breaking the mask in half, even though the mask previously survived being ran over by a steamroller, and in one episode he actually did try to put on the mask, but comically it was just too small for his fat head. Another duo of supervillain characters are the Terrible Two, who are a duo of teenagers who went to a nuclear power plant because they wanted to become superheroes, but instead they just ended up getting sick and were sent to the hospital. Now on the way to the hospital there was actually an accident that sent them flying. Dan, the big guy, fell into a vat of putty and became the putty thing, while Eddie, the smaller, skinnier guy, fell into a pet shop aquarium and became the fish guy. The two villains are actually an homage to Bill and Ted. And finally we have one of the most interesting villains in the show in my opinion, called Skillet, who is an imp from the Shadowland. He is over 4,000 years old and stays forever young by absorbing the shadows of other people. He is obviously a parody of Peter Pan. Now the mask is actually the only person who's really immune to the Skillet's shadow stealing powers. And in the episode Shadow of a Skillet, he actually states that he really hates it when good people possess the mask, and actually ends up hinting that President Abraham Lincoln used to have it. And in my opinion, folks, I really do think that the mask helped Lincoln in his wrestling career. So, ladies and gentlemen, those are all the biggest characters, and I gotta say, they are pretty interesting. You can really tell that they put a lot of effort into writing their motives, origin stories, and whatnot. I honestly kind of do think that the villains are a little bit more interesting than the heroes, but that's just me. The episodes were also very well made with good jokes, Tex Avery style slapstick, and of course fleshed out character interaction. Now the story of the cartoon was really interesting in my opinion, as it really did not follow like a set in stone storyline, but instead it was like how do I say this? It was actually like developed through the character interaction more than anything, honestly. The episodes themselves were mostly like small one-offs, with only like a few episodes actually being sequels to one another. And you can definitely tell that there were small subplots unfolding with the characters. The only con that I do have is that they never really made Stanley and Peggy be a sort of like a couple thing. Honestly, in my opinion, like they do actually function really good as friends, but honestly I would have actually preferred if they try to do something like try to bring in Stanley and Peggy closer to get Stanley out of his shut-in personality, maybe do something different with the mask, but that's honestly just my humble opinion, and overall I'm pretty satisfied with the way they handled the writing and all that. The cartoon also had two awesome crossovers with Ace Ventura Pet Detective called The Ace Man Cometh and Have Mask Will Travel, and also it had a controversial episode called Flight as a Feather, which actually had nudity implications and was not aired on Fox Family. During this episode, Mayor Tilton's ceremony is crashed by his crazy ex, who ends up taking off her trench coat and revealing that she is wearing dynamite as underwear and threatens to blow herself up and the mayor for dumping her. And if that wasn't enough to top it all off, the mayor's aide almost calls her a stripper at one point.
Thank you, you're too kind. No, it's just a feather. Well, it's my lucky feather, but really you are too kind.
Mayor or not, nobody jilts Cookie Vavoom and gets away with it.
Mr. Mayor, it's that exotic dancer you were dating. Miss Vavoom, you can't just...
Oh, can't I?
Dynamite.
That's right, 2 megatons worth. If I can't have Mortimer, then no one can.
Man, oh man, they really don't make them like they used to, don't they, everyone? I really do remember when I used to watch this cartoon as a kid, and honestly, folks, you just cannot forget that intro, It was definitely one of the best shows in the 90s. And now comes the unfortunate part. Now, some of you might actually be wondering, why is this show underrated? Well, it was overshadowed by the movie, which was an amazing movie, don't get me wrong. But yeah, unfortunately, sometimes things that come out during the a similar time period often end up being overshadowed by others, but that does not mean that The Mask did not have a cult following, and it still has to this day. And honestly, folks, I really do wonder why no one has tried to make another Mask cartoon, because honestly, with this IP, you would definitely see a lot of improvement, especially in the animation department. Today's animation is much more advanced than it was in the 90s, and honestly, with The Mask's reality-defining superpowers and modern animation techniques, it would actually be a pretty good blend in my opinion. So in closing, The Mask was an awesome kid-friendly cartoon inspired by a much more darker and violent comic book with great humor and well-written characters, a true underrated classic in every right, ladies and gentlemen. Anyway, everyone, that about wraps it up for this video. Thank you all so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe and press the bell icon, and if you wish to support me, my Patreon link is in the description below, and as always, I'm Demon Cringe, and I'll be seeing you guys in the next video.